Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about another one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. In my other videos, I did a whole series about Brooklyn. Today I'm going to be talking about Staten Island, which is the borough that I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and up through the 2000s. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the Mafia. Staten Island was known for having a very strong presence of the Italian Mafia all through the later part of the 20th century. You can Google it, you can YouTube it. It is definitely true that they had a strong presence in a lot of industries, both large and small, and in a lot of other ways. The South Shore of Staten Island, which is the part closer to New Jersey, farther away from Brooklyn and Manhattan, was overall had a very large Italian-American presence in the 80s and 90s when I grew up. I would venture to say that they were maybe the dominant background of most people in a lot of the neighborhoods there, especially Eltingville, Annandale, Great Kills, Prince's Bay, the areas where I grew up. So, some people who are interested in the topic of the Mafia, their history, and people who watch a lot of the testimonials on YouTube about it, and from former mobsters, from people associated with that life, from detectives, police. The stories are really fascinating. They read like a very good soap opera, like a modern day Game of Thrones. And I have no doubt that that's true. And especially the ones in Brooklyn, they talk a lot about how the presence was really felt even from a young age. They would see the guys on the corner, they would see the social clubs, and they knew, at least had an idea of what it was about, and that it was something they aspired to, and a lot of them fell into that life or got into it. So what was it like for somebody like me? I'm from a Jewish background. I am half Italian from one side of my family and Jewish on the other half. So first and foremost, I'll say that I did not grow up in the Italian-American community around me. Like I said, the Italian-American community was very strong, and I did not go to church. I was not raised in the church. I was not raised Catholic. I didn't go to any of the Catholic organizations. I didn't go to the CYO, the Catholic Youth Organization, where a lot of people played basketball or baseball or whatever, different sports leagues. I didn't go to Catholic school. So overall, I feel I didn't grow up around the local Italian-American community. Even the Italian side of my family did not live in Staten Island or anywhere close to it. So I wasn't a part of it. I was, in that way, an outsider. So, as far as the Mafia in the 80s and 90s, I didn't know it existed around me. I really had no idea that it existed around me up until I was in high school. It was not something that anybody I knew growing up talked about, anybody I went to school with talked about. The teachers didn't talk about it. My friends' parents, I never heard talk about it. Now, I'm just saying I never heard it spoken about. I had no idea it existed around me. I'm just saying that's my testimonial. That's my experience. Did I see a lot of well-dressed older men driving luxury cars that did not look like the typical suburban dad? Yes, I did. But to me, they just dressed a little different. They carried themselves a little different, and that was just their personality. You saw a lot of Italian restaurants. You saw Italian pork stores, groceries, whatever, more than in other places probably. But that's just the way it was to me. That was the only place I knew. And there wasn't anything especially, there wasn't anything special about it. Now, I knew that there were Irish bars. I knew that there were Jewish delis. So there was nothing that stood out there. And of course, I'm not saying that the Italian businesses all were controlled by the mob or anything to do with it. I'm just saying how normal, really, the community I grew up in seemed to me. In most ways, it didn't seem much different from the suburban life that I saw on TV. Like I said, I was aware that it wasn't the same. I definitely knew that from a young age. Like, just the fact that people didn't look the same, definitely didn't look the same or carry themselves like they did on Full House or The Wonder Years. I got an idea that it was different from that, but as far as the Mafia, like, I never felt, like I said, I didn't even know it existed, so I can't say I ever felt pressured to join it. Nobody I knew felt pressured to join it. Nobody I knew aspired to join it. And I would say from the friends of mine who weren't even of an Italian background, a lot of them didn't even know it existed. And they even questioned if it was really true. Now, later on, I think a lot of it became more obvious, especially if I read the local news. But outside of those circles, and I was in high school, was in the honors classes. Now, these were all people who were talking about what colleges they were getting into. So certainly the street life was very far from our minds. So it reminds me a little bit of the video I did about my time working in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which certainly has a lot of violent crime. And you can Google that and watch a lot of videos about that too. But in a lot of ways, when I was walking the streets of Brownsville, when I was working there, at least every week, if not every day for a while, it wasn't much different from other neighborhoods in Brooklyn. There was a commercial center, there were businesses there were clothing stores, there were fast food. It certainly wasn't the same as as Williamsburg. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of differences. Just like I said, I had the idea that where I grew up was a suburban American place, but very different in a lot of ways. That's what I can also say about Brownsville. That as far as it being a lower income African American neighborhood in Brooklyn, it resembled on the surface, as somebody who didn't live there, somebody who was an outsider, it resembled in a lot of ways Flatbush. It resembled Flatlands, Canarsie. It had a commercial center and businesses, and people went about their business, and it had a hospital, and people went to the hospital and got released from there. And there were some homeless people, and things like that. Now, people would tell me in Brownsville about the crime, so I certainly knew it was there. And if you read the news, it certainly was there. No doubt about it. But as somebody who just was an outsider, just walking around, not really in the community, I wasn't aware of it. And that's what I could say about the Mafia. Like the famous 4th of July parties, I remember them very well. And now I know that other people in other places didn't have 4th of July parties that were as extravagant. And I know that now that the Mafia was behind a lot of them. But to me, they were just extravagant 4th of July parties. And nobody was whispering about how the Mafia got the fireworks or anything like that. So that's what I can say about it. Nothing sensational. If I could have very well known very little about it if I never read the news, if I never watched YouTube, it would be like a very small part of my life. I found out more about it in high school. Some people talked about it. I kind of put it together, what was going on with a lot of people around me, businesses around me, what was behind them. There was some more talk about it. But as far as conversations I heard, people in my family, in my friend's family, my friends, nobody was saying like, oh yeah, this guy's father is a mob boss or something like that. I even knew one kid from a Chinese family, and I heard about his father being maybe some kind of gangster / community leader in Chinatown. And I heard about that way before I heard about the Mafia in Staten Island. I didn't see social clubs or anything that like I can remember even being like, oh yeah, that was a social club. They were probably there. I didn't know about them. Certainly no, like, people I saw getting shot as a result of the Mafia. Like here and there were a few incidents. I think they were just domestic incidents in my neighborhood. I never heard about, up until much later on, about any like violence related to the Mafia. People affected by it. I'm sure it was there, but it was not in my life, in my presence, up until like I was it wasn't a part of my life at all, but certainly wasn't something I even heard about until like I was almost an adult. So that's what I can say about it. Certainly was a different suburban life growing up, but in a lot of ways it wasn't. It was the same as what you saw. It had a lot of the features of American suburban life in the 80s and 90s. Very racially segregated. Like you might see in those movies, E.T., Back to the Future. Not as diverse as it is now. For maybe the younger people would have a tough time like conceiving of that. But that's really all I can say about it. It wasn't a part of my life. So if you have questions, comments about it, leave it below. I'll answer them. I'll take a look at them. I really look at all of them in my pages. You can watch my other videos about Brooklyn. I go in depth into Brooklyn from what I saw. Really interesting stuff. Check it out. Anyway, I want to have some more videos on Staten Island. I do think there is more to say, especially if you're like interested in this kind of thing. There's nothing really sensational I can say about it growing up. as far as what I witnessed, but I think there's more to say. So stay tuned.